Welcome everyone to the Ontario Caregiver Organization's webinar series. These webinars bring together caregivers and subject matter experts to explore topics of interest to caregivers. We do this to support and engage chosen family, friends, neighbors, really anyone who's caring for someone else. My name is Katie Muirhead, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. We begin this gathering by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. And while we meet on a virtual platform with people joining us from across the province, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land we each call home. The land that I'm standing on is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendships of Indigenous peoples. As team members at OCO, we are learning about the lands from which we work, exploring how we can be meaningful allies and how we can support the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We invite you to take a moment to reflect on the land where you are. And if you're not familiar with that, we will be sharing an interactive map that tells you which traditional territory your city or town sits on. And you can find that at native-land.ca. Our webinar today is called Communicating with People Living with Dementia. Communication is a vital part of our lives, and it's how we maintain our relationships. When dementia affects a person's ability to express themselves and understand, it can strain the bonds between caregiver and the care recipient. In today's webinar, we will learn more about understanding the symptoms of dementia and how to respond to changes, learning how dementia affects communication, and receive useful tips and strategies for your conversations with people living with dementia as they progress through the disease, along with available supports and resources. Joining us today to speak more about this is Robin Smart from the Alzheimer Society of Waterloo, Wellington. Robin has been the public education coordinator with the Alzheimer Society for almost 20 years, and her past experience in long-term care and various roles rounds out her expertise supporting older adults and persons with a range of diagnoses and disabilities. We're so happy to have you joining us today, Robin, to share your expertise in supporting and communicating with people with dementia.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here today. I appreciate very much that I could share this time with you and that you are sharing this time with me. So we are here to talk about communication. Obviously, something very important. Some people even say the ability to communicate is a right. So communicating with people living with dementia takes a little bit of expertise, and hopefully we can help you learn a few tips and tricks today. What we're going to start with is just talking for a moment about the word dementia, because dementia, that word, isn't actually a disease. It's really an umbrella term for the brain changes caused by diseases in the brain that get worse over time. These diseases slowly destroy neurons, that's a fancy word for the nerve cells in the brains, and their ability to talk or connect with each other. Changes in the person's ability can include memory loss, problems with language, trouble with familiar tasks, and dementia is diagnosed when these changes start to affect the person's everyday activities. So on the screen right now, these are the 4 most common types of dementias, but there are over 90 different forms of dementia that all impact the brain a little bit differently. In order to understand communication changes, we need to understand that each person may be impacted differently. If you want to learn more about dementia, there are opportunities at the local Alzheimer societies or even AlzEd, and I'll talk about that later. You'll notice that on the screen right now, we've listed the 4 most common types of dementia, and Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. Anywhere from 60 to 80% of cases are Alzheimer's dementia. Then there's vascular dementia, the second most common type of dementia, and approximately 20% of cases come from vascular. Then there's something called Lewy body dementia. You may or may not have heard of Lewy body. Looks like a cross between Alzheimer's and Parkinson's almost, and anywhere from 5 to 15% of people might have Lewy body. And then there are a whole raft of different dementias that fall under the frontotemporal dementia tag, and they are rarer, but they certainly affect communication because some of those dementias actually start with language loss before memory loss or anything else. So when we're talking about communication, no matter what type of dementia somebody has, eventually communication becomes impaired. Technically, when you take the word communication apart, it means the exchange of information or messages between 2 or more people. And that information can be in the form of speech or signals or writing or behavior. And it's really very essential, actually. It's essential when we are establishing and developing relationships with others. And it involves the intentional and the unintentional sharing of ideas and thoughts. So communication really does rely on the cooperation of partners to adapt to each other's level of knowledge, attitudes, and stress, their levels of ability, because the person living with dementia cannot change. And so it's up to you and I. We must be the ones to change to enhance the ability to communicate. Now, when we talk about communication and you think, well, how do we communicate? It's really broken down into 3 systems. So in all forms of communication, the sender, obviously, the person sending the message, sends it out, and that could be through words or body language or facial expression to another person, the receiver. So it's a 2-way street, sender and receiver. When the receiver responds by sending a message back, this is called dialogue. And when we communicate, we convey messages or exchange information, to share needs, opinions, ideas, beliefs, feelings, emotions, experiences, values, anything you can think of. And communication is more than just talking and listening. It involves interpreting and understanding. Somehow, sometimes the message is not received clearly because of how the information was communicated, or changes in the brain due to dementia, or even obstacles such as noise. So on the slide right now, you see that there are 3 forms of communication. And I'm going to look at each one individually very briefly. Verbal communication. I think you know what that's about. It's the words we use. And we are most conscious of our verbal communication. People usually go there when you say the word communication. They think of talking. Then there's nonverbal communication, and that tends to convey our true emotion. Sometimes it's called body language or body talk. That includes eye contact, facial expression, gestures, pacing. It's all the things that don't come out of our mouth. That's the nonverbal. It could be your posture. Maybe you've crossed your arms, maybe you're frowning or grimacing, or maybe if you have teenagers, you've seen them roll their eyes, or maybe it's giving people a thumbs up. Then there's paraverbal, and you might not have heard that term before, but paraverbal is pretty important. It's how we sound when we send the message. So that's your tone of voice, the emotion that you might put into your voice, the pacing, the speed, how slowly you speak or how fast you speak, the volume, whether I get really loud or I get really soft, the highness or the lowness with which you speak, whether you're whispering, whether you have a soft voice. And how a person interprets the message depends approximately 38% on our paraverbal. And when it comes to nonverbal, that's 55% of the message. And words, the thing you probably thought you were going to use to communicate, only account for 7% of the message. Now, people living with dementia gradually lose the ability to use and to understand language and words, but they still have the ability to read nonverbal. So their nonverbal abilities remain well into the disease process. So we've established that dementia is going to affect communication. And I'm wondering if you could throw in the chat right now. I'm going to talk to you, but while I'm talking, put it up in the chat if you would. What communication changes have you noticed in people living with dementia? So think about your person, whoever you are here on behalf of today, and think about what communication things have you noticed with them. So I'm going to talk a little bit right now about the early stages. Well, word finding came up right away for most people. In the early stages of dementia, the impairment in our short-term memory impacts our ability to hold and maintain a conversation. And changes in communication are reflected by losses in vocabulary, and I'm seeing some of that, word finding problems coming through, understanding abstract language, the ability to understand messages on the phone, the ability to verbalize ideas, and not being able to keep up with the conversation. Very, very common challenges in communication early. People in the early stages are actually often aware of their communication difficulties, and they can feel embarrassed or frustrated or scared. You might notice that they talk a little less than usual. You might find that positive encouragement is a bonus to them, or giving them helpful clues or gentle reminders to help them complete their thoughts and sentences. That might become a way of life for you. That might become necessary with time. Now, dementia can have a profound effect on the language abilities of people living with whatever kind of dementia, whatever disease they have. And the language deterioration is known as aphasia. That's the technical word. Perhaps a doctor or a clinician will use the term aphasia, where people experience and have a hard time expressing themselves, finding the right words, understanding spoken language, reading and writing. So that's language in and language out is affected. People living with dementia will lose specific communication during the early, the middle, and the late stages of the disease. And as their different diseases progress, nonverbal communication will become increasingly important. So we absolutely have to make sure that we mean what we say and say what they mean, because they're going to tune into the nonverbal. Those two have to match. Despite the changes in communication abilities, it's important to remember that communication does remain possible at every stage of the disease. That is very important to remember. So let's talk about those two streams. Expressive language, that's the output of language. That's the ability to express your wants and your needs through verbal and nonverbal communication. It's the ability to put thoughts into words and sentences in a way that makes sense and is grammatically correct. And there are a few things in the chat that kind of give a nod to that situation. So I'm going to give a couple of examples. It takes an awful lot of coordinating muscle movements to get your words out. You have to coordinate your tongue and your cheeks and your throat and your breathing. People may have word finding difficulties. They may mix words up. They may mirror speech. They may revert to their mother tongue if English is a second language. They may not remember learning English. You may notice repetitive speech, and I saw that come up in the chat. They may repeat or get stuck on a word or a phrase. Technically, they call that perseveration. Don't worry about learning the technical words. Just understand that what you're seeing and what people are sharing in the chat are very, very common. They might have less awareness of how to respond in social situations. That can happen. They may actually say curse words or other offensive or inappropriate words. They may even create new words for ones that are forgotten. So you probably will notice people asking the same question many times, or perhaps repeating words and phrases over and over. And that can be partially due to the memory loss or partially due to emotional stress and tension. Now, that was expressive. That's getting language out. So people struggle in all those different ways to get their message out. What about inward, the receptive language? That's the input. That's the ability to understand and comprehend spoken language that you hear or that you read. And a person living with dementia may have difficulty interpreting meaning and understanding in conversations. You might notice when you're asking them a question or giving them an instruction, that might be very obvious to you. They may have difficulty processing information. They may have trouble remembering what was said. They may have problems with comprehension. They might not be able to assign meaning to the words they hear. They might lose the ability to filter out background noise. They may have trouble following conversations and go off topic. Perhaps somebody says, you know what, it's raining cats and dogs outside today. That might be very confusing to the person with dementia. They might literally expect animals to come falling out of the sky because they become very concrete thinkers. Now, word finding came up a lot in the chat box a moment ago. And when people struggle with word finding, it becomes very frustrating. They may become very agitated. They may be trying to communicate and they can't. And that's actually scary. It might be upsetting for both of you. Some examples that you might relate to. People might not remember words for certain objects or certain body parts or certain places. They may forget names of people. They may scream, they may yell, maybe they make sounds out of the frustration of not being able to communicate, to remember words. And when it comes to reading and writing, that the comprehension or being able to recall details of what was read may really be impacted. They may have trouble even tracking words across a page. Handwriting can become negatively impacted. Their signatures might become very shaky, very illegible. So that was a lot of negative stuff. I don't want to leave you in that negative headspace. Let us look at some positive interaction tips. So before you speak to the person, you've got an idea in your head, you want to get the idea out, but before you even do that, how can we set folks up for success? Well, some things to consider are you always want to try to approach the person from the front. You don't want to be speaking behind them, and you don't want to be speaking directly beside them. Changes in the brain can cause a loss in peripheral vision. So people tend to have tunnel vision. And if you come up beside them, they might not see you. And if you come up behind them, they probably won't. And you can really startle and scare or upset a person. I always tell my folks, come in about 45 degrees, not right in their face, not nose to nose, but in the front where they can see you. If at all possible, you want to find a quiet place where you and they can concentrate, where there aren't distractions, because the person may be distracted by people, other people in the vicinity, people moving by in front of them, people outside the window. Very much noise is an interference. People cannot concentrate on what you're saying. If there's a television, a radio, background noise, a vacuum, something loud happening, it can also cause a great deal of anxiety when there's noise in the environment. And the more anxious somebody is, the less easy communication becomes. If you can, make genuine eye contact so that you know they are speaking to them, assuming that's culturally appropriate. It's very important that we get somebody's attention and focus before we start our message. And what you're trying to do by doing these things is you're trying to create a space where they feel that they have an opportunity to communicate, that they can trust you and confide in you, that you are doing your best to get the message and therefore ensure that their needs are met. A couple of things to think about, and this will depend because everybody is individual. Everybody has their own way of being. When you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. So we really want you to take to heart that your circumstances will be different from other people's. But think about this. Don't always assume they know who you are. Identify yourself. Make sure that you tell them. Don't ever play the guessing game. Don't ever say, do you know who I am? Do you know who this is? Set them up. Tell them. It will help ease any insecurity they have. You never want to reality check somebody. It just causes fear and anxiety. What we want to do if somebody is not on the same page that we are, if their reality isn't lining up with ours, we kind of want to join them in their journey. We don't want to put them on the spot. We don't want to call them out. We don't want to publicly correct them. What we want to do is we want to just encourage conversation. We want to go on hearing what they have to say. So you can do that reassurance piece and communication through touch, through sound, sight, smell, even taste sometimes. Hand gestures and facial expressions are huge because remember, 55%, over half of our communication is that nonverbal piece. You want somebody to have a drink, for example. You might show them the cup, have them drink it. You might take a drink out of your cup. Or if you don't have a cup handy, you might just mimic. You really want to try to connect with somebody's past. For many people living with dementia, they are struggling to make sense of their current circumstances with very old information, not current and up-to-date information. And one of the ways that we can support people in being autonomous, in participating in conversation, is by not overwhelming them with what we call an open-ended question. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What do you want to eat? Those are huge open-ended questions. The person would have to know all the possible choices. Then they would have to remember them, rank order them, make a choice, and communicate that to you. So if we want to support people, can we instead give them some choice? Often two choices. Would you prefer tea or coffee? Would you like your red sweater or your blue jacket? Giving them a choice allows them to work with a manageable amount of information at any one time. And the other thing that you might want to think about, frustrating as these situations are that we find ourselves in when communication is limited, is using humor. Laughter really is the best medicine. That's why Reader's Digest has had that slogan for as long as they've had it. If there's a way to laugh about misunderstandings or the neat new words they come up with or the mistakes of interpretation, if you can laugh with them, never at them. Obviously, we want to be sensitive. You never want to laugh at somebody, but laughing with somebody often reduces the tension and helps them think a bit better and enhances communication. So on the screen right now, you can see 12 different boxes, and these are all ways that we can help create positive interactions. So with a really thoughtful approach to communication, it is possible to have good interactions, positive interactions, even when somebody has dementia. So let me give you a few ideas. We'll just unpack a few of these here. I like this one. I think it's so important. I've mentioned more than once today that nonverbal is huge in communication. It's over 55% of our communication. So when you listen, listen with your ears and watch with your eyes. It is really important that you read the person's nonverbal just as they are reading your nonverbal. So it's not just what you hear, but it's what you see. You really want to acknowledge any emotions and you want to validate folks. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Please use their insured, or you want to use their preferred name. Now, this is going to sound a little strange to you, but bear with me. There may come a time when somebody doesn't recognize, particularly for women, a married name, and somebody calls them Mrs. Smith and they don't respond, but they call them by their first name and they do respond. There may actually come a point where people might not recognize when you call them mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, hey, Papa, please stand up. But if you say, hey, Fred, please stand up, because that's their name, they might respond to you. So sometimes as dementia progresses, we need to call them by their given name. Whatever they prefer, where they are in their journey, that's what you want to do. You definitely want to keep a calm tone of voice. Folks pick up and reflect back what comes off of us. So we want to keep ourselves calm. You want to speak slowly and clearly, but not necessarily loudly. What we want to do is try to give sound bites. We want to present one idea at a time and allow time in between our sentences. So each sentence just has one thought, one idea. It's not a complex sentence. It's not a run-on sentence. It's one tidbit of information at a time. And you need to really put pauses into your speech so people can catch up and they can answer you. Let's say you're asking a question. It's a good idea to use the 20-second rule. And that is literally after you ask your question, you pause for 20 seconds. You want to give that person time to interpret and answer. It's very important not to, after a few seconds, jump in. So we need to learn to be a little more comfortable with waiting. You want to give people time to follow the first direction before you move on to something else. And when you are giving instructions or directions or encouragement, if you can be sure to use words that people recognize, whatever that might be. It might not be the current politically correct language for something, but you always want to use words that people find familiar. So short sentences, familiar words, be really patient, give people extra time to respond. You might want to avoid finishing sentences for the person unless it's agreed that you're going to do that. So you want to stay positive and reassuring. You want to be aware of your nonverbal. I've mentioned that before. Because nonverbal is definitely a good indicator of how somebody's feeling. That's why you're going to listen with your eyes. If appropriate, you can touch somebody on the hand or the shoulder. You're always there to correct. Not correct, sorry. I said that backwards. I was so nervous I'd get it wrong. I got it wrong. You are there to connect, not correct. You want to connect with their emotions. You don't want to reason. You don't want to argue. The other thing to think about is the time of day. What time of day is best for that person? And plan important conversations and important things, appointments you might have at that time of day that works best for them. But what if you don't understand? What should you say if you don't understand? Well, definitely you want to maybe acknowledge that. It's important to let the person know that you're not understanding. You don't want to say or let on that you do when you don't. Because what if you agree to something and then you don't know what you agreed to and you don't do it? What if they expect you to do something and it never happens? So if you're not understanding, you want to actually be clear about that. You might want to acknowledge and acknowledge that it's hard for both of you. No, it's frustrating for both of us, isn't it? You can't find the words you want, and I'm having difficulty understanding. I'm sorry. Let's try again. Or you might want to take a moment before you try again. And sometimes you apologizing, as I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. If you're not able to understand, sometimes you can ask them to just repeat the message and really look for other clues and acknowledge that they're doing a good job. Positive feedback goes a long way. Let them know that you are going to stay with them and work on understanding. And I think that these things are important to know if you can get them to take a moment, take a couple of deep breaths. It's good for both of you if you do it together. Sometimes that just resets, and sometimes it's easier to find communication. Sometimes you might just find one word. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a little film. It's just 2.5 minutes. It's a good little film. And at the end, we're going to give you a resource that summarizes this film for you.
A person living with dementia may have trouble expressing themselves or understanding what's being communicated. Try these 5 tips to help you stay connected. Tip 1 is use what you know about the person. What does the person like? Use that knowledge to suggest conversation topics or activities they may enjoy. Nurture the person's skills and abilities. Focus on what they can do instead of what they can't. When the person's making a choice, offer them a couple of options that you know they will like. Tip 2 is reduce distractions. Take notice of what's around you. This is a simple thing to do, but it can make a big difference. Identify possible distractions in the person's environment and try to minimize them. Account for any hearing or vision challenges the person may have. Make eye contact to help focus the person's attention. Tip 3 is chat face-to-face. When speaking with the person, be clear and concise. Avoid talking to the person if you're behind them or where they can't see you. Speak clearly using short and simple sentences. Show as well as talk. Using actions can help give your words meaning. The 4th tip is to be flexible, as it may not always go as planned. A person's abilities can change from day to day. So take a few moments at the beginning of the conversation to assess how they're doing. Look for changes in behavior and body language that may tell how the person's feeling, especially if they may indicate discomfort. Adjust to accommodate. When the person's unable to communicate verbally, communicate through the senses, like touch. Our 5th tip is to stay positive. Help make the person feel comfortable by modeling the mood. Be aware of your own tone and body language. Connect instead of correct. Ignore mistakes and give encouragement. When you feel overwhelmed, take a step back and exhale. Remember to take care of yourself too. It's not easy to be there for the person living with dementia, while also taking care of yourself at the same time. There will be days when these tips don't seem to help, but your presence is still felt by the person living with dementia, even when it may not be obvious. And it's important that you find a healthy balance and ask for help when you need it. Remember, you're not alone. For more tips and examples for meaningful conversations with people living with dementia, please visit alzheimer.ca/communication.
All right, so great little film. And as I say, we've got a handout for you that goes with that film. And you'll get the slides, and we put the link in so you can show it on YouTube to anybody you like. I want to spend some time now on validation, a really super, super important topic. Validation is a method of therapeutic communication. It was developed by the social worker Naomi Feil. And this approach is recognized as a respectful way to communicate with people who are in various stages of dementia. And it's based on very general humanistic principles. When you validate a person with dementia, you accept them as they are without judgment. You have empathy for them and you try to create an awareness of their experience. You listen to them without adding your own reality. You don't correct them. You don't reason with them. You help them to express themselves by using cues that show your interest and understanding. And you can nod, you can make eye contact, you can mirror their gestures or their facial expressions. You validate what is emotionally real for the person with dementia. You accept the person's experience as what they are feeling. And I'm just going to give you a really quick example. So we'll say that a person comes in, a mother comes in and tells her son that she hasn't had anything to eat in days. But her son ate breakfast with her this morning. And the son responds by saying, "You ate breakfast this morning and you had lunch an hour ago. I cooked your breakfast for you." That perhaps needs some improvement. That is not validation. That is what we would call reality orientation. And that's not where the person is at. And you always want to meet the person where they're at. A little bit better might be, "You must be hungry then. Would you like me to get you something to eat?" So we always want to try to look at the situation from the side of the person living with dementia. Now, I'm going to give you just a couple of examples here of things that you might want to say to enhance conversation. So this is very practical. One of the things that kind of shuts down conversation is asking somebody living with dementia if they remember something, even in a conversational tone, like, "Do you remember the time we went to Wichita?" What you might choose to do instead, if you want to talk about Wichita, is say, "I was thinking about the time we took a trip to Wichita." And they can either respond to that, "Yes, Wichita was cool," or "Where's Wichita?" Or you might go on and give them some more, or they may say something else and then you follow them in whatever they say. But when we ask people to remember, if we say, "Do you remember?" or if we say, "Well, I remember," it puts them on the spot. It shows up their lack of ability to remember. So I always say, I take it on me, "I was thinking about." Here's another example. We often want to instigate conversation and we want to start conversation by asking a question because that's what we do with our other friends and relatives. "So, what did you do today? What's new? What did you see on TV? What did you have for lunch?" We're trying to engage the person. But unfortunately, if there is memory impairment, these questions actually close conversation down because the person has to either say, "Well, I don't know, I don't remember, I don't know," or they might make something up. So maybe you could say, instead of asking them, "What did you watch on TV this afternoon?" Maybe you could say, "I hear you've been watching MASH. I think that Klinger is such a funny character." Here's another example. Where did we go earlier? You're trying to prod somebody to remember something. It's usually not conducive to a comfortable conversation. So perhaps you might say instead, "Hey, I appreciated that you kept me company when we went to the nursery earlier," or "I appreciate that you were with me when we went to the grocery store earlier." Set them up to know what you're going to talk about, not by asking a question, but by giving them the information they need. Here's another example for you. So I'm going to just read you this little scenario, and then you have a choice between the answers A, B, and C. And I'd love you to put that in the chat, what you think. So you are requesting Shirley's usual help in setting the table for lunch, and you've explained there will be 5 places to set, and each place setting needs a knife, a fork, a spoon, and when she's finished that, there will be 5 glasses of tea to pour. Shirley looks at you and says she does not want to help today. What could be her reason for not wanting to help? Your choices are: A, she is probably insulted that you explained all the necessary steps to her and thinks you're treating her like a child. B, she's forgotten that this is her job or her task, or C, she's been given too many tasks to process all at once and feel overwhelmed. Go to the head of the class, every one of you. I see nothing but C's flying into the chat. That's absolutely right. If we want to help people communicate, we need to break things down into individual tasks. I'm taking you back to that idea of one soundbite, one bit of information at a time, one thing completed before you move on to the next. Okay. So I'm looking at the time, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do some summary for you, and then we can move on to the Q&A. So in a summary sense, let's remember, because we've covered a lot of information in a short time, it's important to remember that communication does vary from person to person. It can vary from one time to the next, depending on the person's mood, their health, your approach, the task, the environment around them. All these things have to be taken into consideration when communicating with somebody living with dementia. When language is lost, the innate ability to communicate by emotion, expression, and touch is still with us. So don't forget that. That's the positive part. And likewise, feeling, the ability for people living with dementia to feel their own emotions, that remains despite communication losses and challenges. And we always want to remember to include the person in conversation, even if you don't think they understand. We don't want to talk about somebody in front of them as if they, weren't even in the room. We want to include people. Being ignored is even worse than not being understood. And when you include the person, they always have the option of withdrawing from the conversation if they're uncomfortable or not interested. But we have to give them that chance, that option. They might surprise you. They might participate. You never know. Now, we've got some handouts for you, and these will be sent to you afterwards. This is a great resource on communication from the Alzheimer Society of Canada. And this one is the complimentary resource that goes with the little film I showed you. I did say that earlier, you should be in touch with your local Alzheimer Society if you wanted to know more about any of the different types of dementia. And the Alzheimer Society is there for any type of dementia. They can give you information, education, support. It's free. We also have something called Alz Educate, and that's an opportunity where you can take courses to learn about communication and about dementia. It's all online. It's free. You just sign up and you open a little account with Alz Educate, and you can watch all sorts of interesting videos and webinars on dementia. This is the contact information. If you don't know your local Alzheimer Society, you can phone that number, or if you're handy with the smartphone, you can do the QR code and figure out who your Alzheimer Society is. We are going to go to a question and answer period. I just want to give you a gentle reminder that questions need to be in a very general nature. Please don't share any identifying information or specific questions. And always the staff at the Alzheimer Society or the Ontario Caregiver Organization would be happy to provide support for your individual situations. So keep in touch. This is the contact information, and you can see the various social media ways to stay in touch as well. If you look in the chat box, they've got links there for you. I'm going to stop sharing the slides, and we'll open it to Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Robin. That was so informative and helpful. We had a very busy chat box with lots of comments, lots of questions. And so we will take the next, 10 minutes or so to try to get through as many of those as we can. One sort of housekeeping question I want to clarify with you before we move into some content related questions. On your slide, for creating positive interactions, I think you said there's 12 boxes, but there were only 9 on the slide.
Oh, did I count wrong? I'm sorry. You know why? I said, it doesn't matter why I said that, because we now have the 12 ways that you can modify brain health, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry, I looked at the slide. I was too busy trying to keep eye contact with the camera to count, and I
Quite
apologize.
all right. I just wanted to confirm because folks were like,
Yeah.
we're very in tune with your content and wanted to make sure they weren't missing anything. So it was you just misspoke in those
I
9 boxes.
humbly apologize, folks.
It's okay. It's all
My
right.
bad.
So we had a couple, I'm going back to the very beginning of your talk. We'll try our best to go in order. And we had a couple questions around mild cognitive impairment. So you shared sort of those top 4 diagnoses, and certainly we know that there are many, many, many more under the umbrella of dementia. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to
Sure.
mild cognitive impairment, and where does that fall kind of on the scale or the range of dementia? And if somebody's experiencing mild cognitive impairment, does that automatically mean they have dementia, or could that mean something else?
Okay. Mild cognitive impairment is often called MCI. If you ever heard the term MCI, it refers to mild cognitive impairment. People who live with mild cognitive impairment are usually struggling with perhaps memory and other cognitive issues, more so than the average person of their age, but not enough that it interferes with their ability to function on a daily basis, which is the measuring stick to call it dementia. So people with MCI sometimes get a little worse as time goes on and can develop dementia. Some people with MCI sort of stay at that level where they're struggling, but it's not dementia. And some people actually take on some life changes that are very positive for them, and they actually improve. So I would always encourage each person to go and get checked with your medical practitioner. And you can definitely be in touch with the Alzheimer Societies about MCI. We have talks on MCI. We have information on MCI. We actually have special programs designed just for people living with MCI. There's one called Ropes, Learning the Ropes. It is specifically for people with an MCI diagnosis. And you really need to know that although it is sometimes referred to as a precursor to dementia, that is not 100% for everybody at all. And we can help you learn some really good lifestyle skills that can help you cope better. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important as folks are putting questions in the chat and thinking about their diagnoses or mild cognitive impairment, that we tap into those medical resources, your family doctors, the local Alzheimer Society, to get that really specific. We can't diagnose or prescribe here on our webinars, and so we can't be super specific, but go for it, Robin.
We can't. I want you to think hard about going to your doc, because there are so many things that can mimic dementia that are actually treatable. They're considered acute situations. So you always want to go and have a full medical workup, because if it is something that is treatable, let's treat it and let's get your brain functioning better than it is.
And on the vein of doctors and family doctors, I see a question that just came through around, and I know others have experienced this in my conversations with caregivers. How do we look at assessment as when somebody might not be as receptive to going to the doctor? Do you have any tips or strategies for those situations?
We have 7 minutes left. That is a
I
talk unto
know.
itself. But here's what I'm going to suggest to you. A couple of things. First of all, I would encourage you, there is a specific page on the Alzheimer Society web pages specific about preparing for a doctor's appointment. Often it takes some time. You need to be very clear and specific about what the changes are. And I suggest people have it written out. And you probably need to share that with the medical practitioner ahead of time, just saying this is what the family is seeing. Because I often find if you get somebody to go to an appointment, they're pretty high on adrenaline and they seem great. And the doctor's talking to them one-on-one for 10 minutes and they sail through the appointment and you're going home going, what the heck? So I would encourage you to check out those resources on preparing for a doctor's appointment. The other thing is, if you're saying to somebody, you have a problem, you keep forgetting, if you're pointing the finger at them, they often are going to come back in a very defensive position, and they may be very scared as well. So maybe going to the doc for something else. Maybe while you're there for the flu shot, you bring up some memory issues. Maybe both of you go in for your annual physicals. When you're not pointing the person out as having a terrible problem, they are often more receptive. Oh, we're all going for our flu shot today? Okay. But do check that out on the webpage.
Great strategies. Yes, making it about everyone, not just about them. That's a great tip. I'm wondering if you have any tips for folks. There's been a couple comments and questions in the chat around convincing someone to participate in personal care or activities of daily living,
It's a brood,
showering,
isn't it?
bathing,
Yeah.
brushing our teeth. And sometimes that can be difficult for folks with a dementia diagnosis. I don't know. And there was a lot of folks that also championed your comments around connection versus correction. So we can see that messaging is getting out there. I'm wondering if you
Good.
have any tips for folks that are trying to encourage their loved ones to manage their hygiene
Yeah.
and take care of those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. It's a hard one. And again, that is a topic unto itself. Thank you for getting connection, not correction, even though I fumbled it. I want you to think about what would happen if somebody came along and started telling you what you had to do. If you are a person living with dementia, you have cognitive impairment, but you have not lost your adult sensibilities. So as soon as somebody starts bossing you around, your back goes up. You can't tell me what to do. And I'm not going to listen to you. You're not my mother. You're not the boss of me. So often the harder we push to get somebody to do something, the harder the pushback. I'm not going to. Sometimes people will do things on autopilot. I will just give you a quick example. We had somebody who was not remembering to brush their teeth and didn't like to be told what to do. And the caregiver put the toothpaste and the toothbrush at the edge of the table. So at the end of the meal, that was the only thing other than the plate that the food was on. The table was cleared except for the toothbrush and the tube of toothpaste. And that person would then see that and their long-term memory would kick in and they would go and brush their teeth and the hassle part was gone. They couldn't find the toothpaste in the bathroom. They couldn't find their toothbrush in the bathroom. Sometimes not wanting to do hygiene has to do with, I don't even know how to do things anymore. I can't tell the soap from the shampoo from the conditioner. I can't tell which way to turn the taps. I can't tell what order I do things in. I can't manipulate that stupid tube. And each tube you buy each week is different. Some of them unscrew and some of them pop open and they're different colors. And you bought Crest one week and you bought, I don't know, Colgate another week. And they're people living with dementia need to have only in front of them what will set them up for success. If you send them in the bathroom to brush their teeth and there are 18 different things on the counter because there's lotions and potions and brushes and hair dryers and who knows, razors, I don't know, stuff out there on the bathroom counter, maybe they can't even find it. The other piece of this is, once again, I really encourage you, go to your local Alzheimer Society. We have counselors trained in helping you look at your own situation, because I gave you an example that worked for that family. That might not work for your family. There are many ways, sometimes just involving the person as well, using techniques that are hand over hand instead of you getting in there brushing somebody's teeth, just from underneath, guiding somebody's hand to their mouth and letting them do the movement. Each case really needs to be brainstormed individually.
Great suggestions. I love that example of just, and I think it's also a great illustration of your earlier slide talking about the different it's not just about verbal communication. It can be about body language and visual cues and all of these other things. I think that's a really lovely example of that and how it worked for that person. So yes, folks, please do connect with your local Alzheimer societies. They have so much available for your care recipient, the person with dementia, but also for you as a caregiver. So I would really encourage folks to connect with their local Alzheimer society for all the questions and all the support that you might need. I'm going to squeeze in one more question before we wrap up for the day. And we had a couple come through around communicating with the healthcare team. So examples like bringing your loved one to an appointment who maybe they're still making decisions for themselves, but their healthcare practitioners talk really quickly. They use a lot of jargon and it's hard for them to understand. Or for those in-home support staff that are coming in and maybe call the care recipient a nickname or something that maybe isn't, like you said earlier, their preferred name, or it's a personal nickname to the family. Do you have any tips for folks on how to maybe advocate or speak up for their loved ones when they're engaging in healthcare settings?
Right. First, I would like to say that I appreciate that people advocate. Thank you for taking that on and for wanting only the best for your person. I appreciate that. I would also like to say that the PSWs of the world, the healthcare practitioners of the world are doing the best they can under fairly straitened circumstances sometimes. And what tends to go a long way is I'm thinking of people coming into the home right now, is a fairly low-key conversation, a greeting, a welcome. We have PSWs coming into our home, so I'm not unfamiliar with this. But I set it up. They couldn't come through the storm, and so they came a day late, but we thanked them for making that effort and fitting us in, and we appreciated them, and we know that they are important to us, and we want them to know that. And because they're important to us, we want them to know some stuff. And this is what we wanted to share with them. And if I'm taking something away, if I'm saying, please don't call Papa, because that's just family and it's confusing and he thinks you're a grandchild. If they understand perhaps why not to do it, and if you give them the suggestion, we would all appreciate it if you could call him Alfred or, whatever his preferred name is. So often people, if they understand why, as opposed to just, again, the back goes up, don't do that. You always want to set people up for the rationale of why, if it's a healthcare worker. As far as the docs go, this is an ongoing situation. Depending on the time and the specialist and the person or the GP, you can refer, what you can do, they're turning to you and they're saying, how's Papa doing? You can turn and say, how do you think you're doing, Dad? How do you think it's going? And give Dad a chance to say something. And then you can say, well, I got to tell you, this is what we're seeing, and put in your 2 cents worth. So you can try to involve the person coming back in. As far as rhyming off instructions, I would take a paper and pencil with me. And I ask the doctor, can you spell that? Can you say that again? Can I get that in writing? Can I get a copy of that report? It is fair to ask for information, but sometimes the docs are blocked into certain chunks of time, and we have to work within those constraints sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Thanks,
Good
Robin.
luck.
Thank you so much for your time today, your decades of experience. Folks shared so many comments expressing their gratitude and how thorough and succinct and helpful your information was today. So I want to thank you for joining us and for sharing all of these fabulous tips. with our audience, and these tips will live on forever in the recording and the resources that we share out for everyone. So thanks again, Robin. Thanks for joining us today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Katie. Good luck, everybody. Take good care. Call for support, OCO or AS.
Thank you.